Jordan Akira-Meadows, the son of former Alabama and LA Chargers running back Zaccheus Meadows, stood out amongst the California recruiting landscape as one of the top halfback/receiver dual threats in the state. Critics would say that the five-star recruit was skating by on the hype of his father. Ever since Zaccheus Meadows retired, he split his time between Virginia and California each year, and for 6 months, Zaccheus Meadows was his son's high school running back coach during the fall and winter, and then during spring and summer, Zach would move back up to Virginia to help at Fort McNair in DC, training some of the best young military officers in the U.S. And Jordan, one of his two sons, was never interested in carrying on the family military tradition, instead wanting to stay close to his home in California, and his top schools out of high school were USC, Stanford, and his hometown, San Diego State. Stanford made the strongest pitch, and while Jordan was a big partier and liked San Diego State, his father had instilled in him the importance of excelling academically as well, so Jordan went off to Stanford as the third-string running back straight out of the gate. In Jordan's first game against TCU, he was lining up at receiver and had some impactful possessions, showcasing his ability to play both receiver and halfback, just like his dad Zaccheus Meadows did across his entire career. Jordan was getting spot minutes at receiver and rarely got in the backfield with concerns over how small he was, and when he did get his first carry, he got destroyed in the backfield by 3 TCU linemen just immediately. Despite a poor performance as a true running back, Jordan did score his first career touchdown on an angle route, and this would pull Stanford within single digits, and Jordan would get one more opportunity to make a play in the game before being sidelined as the offense walked out 5 receivers, but TCU would still hold on to win the game. And while Jordan finished with 8 carries for -2 yards, he did lead the team in receiving. In week 2, Stanford was up early against the FCS West Royals, and despite an early and consistent lead, Jordan only got on the field for 2 plays. This was shocking as a high-profile recruit who already led the team in receiving the previous week. To not even get 3 snaps was absurd. This of course led to questions and rumors about Jordan being injured, but he was totally healthy. Playing football at Stanford was a big change from high school, and the game was much faster, the players were stronger, and Jordan was the third-string running back to start, moving up to the second string, and in week 3, he had a chance to fight for the starting halfback position. Practices were a chance for Jordan to learn and get better. He listened carefully to the coaches and asked older players for advice, and Jordan worked hard to improve his footwork, get faster, and understand the playbook. His ability to play multiple positions also made him valuable to the team from week 1 on. Even though it was hard, Jordan didn't give up. His skills as both a receiver and a running back helped the coaches try new plays, and Jordan was becoming an important part of the team, and all his hard work was starting to show as he earned the starting running back position. Because his elite route running separated him at running back from his teammates, he chose to focus on that during his practices. And Stanford hadn't had a true freshman starting at running back since 2015 with Bryce Love, who took over for the future Hall of Famer and Christian McCaffrey. In week 3, Stanford was set to play against Syracuse in New York, and Jordan was hyped to get his first crack at starting running back and get some consistent touches on the ground too. And Jordan's first carry got him 2 yards, and on the very next play, Jordan caught it out of the backfield, spun around a defender, and then got absolutely leveled by a linebacker or a safety. And while Jordan didn't get a concussion, he missed the remainder of the game, nursing a chest contusion as Stanford would lose. There may not be a bigger 180 in college football than starting and missing your first game to injury against Syracuse, only to play number 4 Clemson the very next week at Clemson against some of the best athletes in college. And the crowd was deafening, and the first 3 plays, which were drawn up to give the offense some sort of rhythm early, were a nightmare. The Clemson D-line got penetration on 3 straight plays, Jordan lost yards on his first 2 runs, and then Ashton Daniels got sacked on 3rd down before he could even finish the play-action fake. The Stanford defense did their job, but points were hard to come by for the offense apart from a few lucky passes down the field. Stanford still had a shot with 1 more possession and 2 minutes left in the game, but it was 4th and 10, and Ashton Daniels got hit on the throw again by an overpowering defensive line as Clemson would push Jordan and Stanford to 1-3. In week 5, Jordan finally got to move into his dorm. While it was 2 months late, he finally got to share it with his new friend named Mike, and Mike was a linebacker from Texas who loved football, and they quickly became best friends, sharing jokes and listening to music together, and Mike's friendship really helped Jordan feel more comfortable at Stanford, even though he wasn't far from home. Classes at Stanford were really tough, and Jordan had a busy schedule with classes like calculus, ethnographic studies, and econ, and he had to find a way to balance schoolwork and football practice, and Stanford was probably one of the most difficult schools in the country to do that at. Every day was packed. He started with early morning workouts, then went to classes, and ended with long football practices. And Jordan learned how to manage his time wisely so he could fulfill his commitments academically and on the field. And surprisingly, the library became Jordan's favorite place. It was quiet and perfect for studying. He spent hours reading books and taking notes, pushing himself to understand everything that he was learning. And these study sessions taught him some more discipline, so he wouldn't fight the linebacker from Virginia Tech, tackling him 10 yards out of bounds into the kicker net. But it was still another disappointing L on the schedule. Despite a bad start to the season, Jordan's dad, Zaccheus, was a big help. He called Jordan after every practice to give advice and support. "Remember, Jordan, it's not just about being on the team, it's about making a difference," his dad would say. And these talks reminded Jordan of the legacy that he wanted to create for himself. Zach taught Jordan that doing well in school was just as important as playing football. Jordan took that lesson to heart. He knew that education was important and was determined to do well at Stanford. Balancing both football and schoolwork was going to take a lot of effort, but Jordan was ready for it. And while his dad's advice was helpful, Jordan wanted to make his own path. He wanted to show everyone that he could succeed on his own, and this made him work even harder to push himself to do his best, and he would need all of his effort, and then some, if Stanford had any shot of beating their rivals Notre Dame, who are ranked number 5 in the nation at this point. Stanford was only down 3 right before half, which had to be some sort of small miracle, and after Jordan's catch with 30 seconds left, he got pulled off the field, but the offense scored a walk-off TD to take the lead at half. And Notre Dame came out and answered immediately with a touchdown, but Jordan was having some of his best runs of the season. It was tough to play 2 top 5 teams, and both of them happened to be on the road. Stanford drove down the field and Jordan leaped into the end zone to regain the lead for the Cardinals. He and his teammates were celebrating, but the call ended up being overturned and Jordan refused to be denied, getting in the end zone again off the catch, and that would give Stanford the lead, and they'd never look back as they scored 2 more field goals and stole the game. And while there wouldn't be any fans storming the field, this would be without a doubt the highlight of the season for this underperforming Stanford squad. You might think that after playing 2 top 5 teams, you've gone through the gauntlet and now your schedule is starting to lighten up. Well, that wasn't the case for Jordan or Stanford. They had to play SMU, who was another top 5 team, and they would be the 3rd top 5 team in the last 4 games for Stanford. Meanwhile, off the field, Jordan had explored Stanford's exciting campus life, and there were so many activities and clubs for him to join, and Jordan wanted to try everything. He joined a study group in his econ class, and he met students who challenged him to think in new ways, and Jordan also went to parties and other fun events where he could relax and meet people. He was friendly and outgoing, making it easy for him to make new friends, and everyone knew him for his energy and ability to make people smile. Even though there were a lot of fun things to do, Jordan stayed focused on his goals, and he knew that it was important to balance having fun and working hard. His dad words stayed with him: enjoy the journey, but never lose sight of the destination. Jordan and Stanford were down 7 when they ran a stretch to the left with perfect blocking finally as Jordan jogged his way into the end zone, followed by the next drive where Jordan executed a perfect rub route, pulling the DB off Ayo Manor for the 1-play touchdown. SMU, of course, came right back with their own touchdown, and Jordan made one crucial mistake on 3rd and 5, calling for the ball underneath and getting stopped for a 4th down. SMU scored a field goal, and that would be enough for a heartbreaking loss for Stanford, who had the chance to knock off 2 straight top 5s, and to do it at home would have been so sweet. Jordan had the best rushing game of his career with 13 carries and 84 yards and the 1 touchdown, but he didn't have much of an impact receiving with 4 catches for only 9 yards. Jordan made it clear early on that NIL deals were important to him, so he was thrilled to finally sign his first worthwhile one that would give him free access to the wellness center to boost his toughness. As the months went by, Jordan faced new challenges as a college athlete. The busy schedule was hard on his body, and injuries were always a risk, and during one tough practice, he hurt his ankle, which meant he'd have to stop playing for a while. And the injury was frustrating, but it also taught Jordan to be strong. He used this time to watch game film and learning from both his team and his opponents. Jordan worked with the trainers to get better and stay focused on getting back on the field. And while he wasn't totally healthy, he was ready to go for his game against Wake Forest. Jordan had a big-time performance versus Wake Forest, but his team was ice cold in the passing game, with Ashton Daniels throwing a few picks, and Stanford lost their 6th game, meaning they'd have to go undefeated the rest of the way just to make a regular bowl game. Against NC State, on Jordan's 4th carry, he evaded 3 linemen at the handoff to gain yards and broke a tackle while spinning around before taking another vicious hit that left him limping off the field, missing the rest of the game, while Stanford saw their dream of making a bowl game get thrown out the window as NC State stomped Stanford into the turf 48-17. The big change in Jordan's freshman year came during a team meeting after the NC State loss. The head coach praised Jordan's hard work, saying, "Jordan, you're showing us what it means to be a true Cardinal. Battling through 2 significant injuries this season to be out there the next week for your teammates." This boosted Jordan's confidence and confirmed his place on the team. And again, Jordan was the running back one since week 3, but again, freshman running backs just weren't very common, and Jordan's role on the team only grew bigger in the final 3 weeks of the season. Coach started creating plays just for him, using his skills to their advantage. Whether he was running the ball or catching passes, Jordan was unpredictable and made the team better. His teammates admired his ability to play different positions, and he became a key player in important moments. All of his hard work was paying off, and his confidence was soaring. He was proving that he belonged at Stanford, not just because of his father's name, but because of his own talent and effort. He had a grittiness to him that the high school scouts and critics didn't see. He wasn't just coasting, he wanted more for himself and for the Stanford program that was being disgraced by this awful season. Off the field, Jordan continued to do well in his classes. He found a love for economics thanks to a professor who made him think deeply about its real-world applications, and Jordan stayed after class to talk with his professor often. His success in school was a sign of the lessons his dad had taught him about being a well-rounded adult. He was able to maintain a 3.8 GPA with essentially a full-time job on his plate. Stanford was always playing for pride, but now it was just about the pride with no chance of a bowl game or any end-of-season celebration, and winning this game against Cal was about nothing more than pride. Jordan was stuffed at the goal line not once, not twice, but 3 times on separate possessions. And it was starting to feel like he wasn't going to get into the end zone the entire game, but then he broke off his biggest run of the year, and he should have the breakaway speed, but he was caught just inside the 10-yard line. And winning this game would not only add a win to the rivalry, but it would also put Cal out of contention for a bowl game as well. And finally, Jordan got into the end zone when it mattered most in the fourth to stamp a W on the schedule. Finally. Jordan had another solid game with 13 carries for 85 yards, a touchdown, and then a couple of catches for 40 yards. And the final game of the season came against San Jose State, and Stanford had an opportunity to finish the season with 2 straight wins. And throughout his freshman year, Jordan learned how important it was to balance everything. This was the year of balancing as a freshman, managing school, sports, and social life. It was not easy, but he learned how to prioritize his time, and late night study sessions, early morning workouts, and weekend fun became his routine. Not only did Jordan have a duty to his team and his schoolwork, but he also mentored his half-brother Zaccheus, who was a high school quarterback in Atlanta. And even though Jordan never played the position, Zaccheus still wanted tips from Jordan because Zaccheus was a run-first QB who was thinking about making the switch to running back when he hit college. If you're curious about what's next for Jordan after his freshman year, he made a commitment to stay at Stanford for his sophomore year already. He wants to stay there all 4 years at Stanford, but of course there are other factors that do matter, like Stanford getting a good group of players together and actually getting to a bowl game. So Jordan knows internally that if things play out next season in a similar fashion to how they did his freshman year, he will be entering the portal. But for now, Jordan is just happy to be right where he's at, home in California. And Jordan was able to make freshman All-ACC and also freshman All-American. He finished the year with a modest 129 carries for 446 yards, along with 460 receiving yards and a pair of touchdowns. After a long hiatus, we're revisiting how Jordan Akira-Meadows is doing as he prepares for his sophomore year at Stanford. Jam had to re-earn his starting spot, and after the performance he put on in practice, he did just that. And Stanford and Jordan were taking on Hawaii in a night game week 1 of the season in Hawaii. Last season didn't go as planned for Stanford. They ran into a buzzsaw of 3 top 5 teams in 4 weeks, including winning one of them against their rival Notre Dame, which was probably the highlight of Jordan's freshman year, along with winning an All-ACC freshman nod. Stanford and Jordan missed making a bowl game, and that was a major focus all offseason. One big change in the offseason too was that Ayo Manor, Stanford's best receiver, transferred. Jordan remained committed to developing as a dual-threat receiving back, and the team would need to rely on his impact in the passing game more so than ever before. But Hawaii was doing a good job of disrupting Jordan's timing on his routes. Jordan punched in a rushing TD in the 4th to tie the game, and it was time for the defense to do their job. Hawaii milked the clock and scored a touchdown with about 40 seconds left. With 20 seconds left on 4th and 12, Stanford got desperate, and Jordan called for the ball, which got intercepted near midfield, and Hawaii ended up stealing the game. Jordan was in his dorm staring at his laptop screen. His sophomore year was in full swing, but it wasn't just about football anymore. Sure, football was what brought him here. It's what got him to the 5-star ranking, the scholarship, and all the eyes of the nation looking at him. But there's so much more swirling around in his head, things he didn't expect to weigh on him so heavily. To start week 2, in his game against Florida, during pregame, Jordan's phone buzzed. It was a message from his dad, Zaccheus. Just a simple, "Proud of you, son. Keep pushing." His dad has always been supportive, but lately it feels a little bit more complicated. Growing up, Zach was his rock, his football coach, his mentor. But now, as Jordan gets older, he's realizing how different the two are. Florida went on to crush Stanford in week 2, and dreams of making the college football playoffs evaporated right then. Getting back to Jordan's dynamic with his Hall of Fame running back father, Zach splits his time between California and Virginia, working with military officers when he's not coaching back home. Jordan's never been interested in following the family military tradition, and that's always been a point of tension, though they don't really talk about it directly. The distance between them, physically and emotionally, sometimes feels bigger than the miles separating California from Virginia. Still, there's no denying the respect that Jordan has for his father. Zach's advice sticks with him, especially in moments of doubt. But sometimes Jordan wonders if his dad sees him as his own person or just a smaller, younger version of himself. In week 3, despite the fumble, Jordan, Akira-Meadows, and Stanford took care of business. They had a 17-0 lead midway through the 3rd quarter, and Jordan was just ripping off big run after big run, still trying to work on his juke moves, and eventually got to the point where San Jose State did score a touchdown, but now Stanford was just milking the clock, and finally Stanford pulled out their first one of the season in game number 3
North Carolina was unranked, but they shouldn't be underestimated with a 3-1 record given the struggles that Stanford has had up to this point in the season. Jordan's mom, Asa, has always been the quieter one in the family, but she's the one that he calls when things get heavy. She's back home in California, running her own small business and keeping an eye on his younger half-brother Zaccheus, who's about to graduate high school in Atlanta, but came to visit his extended family in California. Asa's not in the whole football thing the way that Zach is. She's more interested in making sure Jordan's happy, healthy, and doing something that makes him feel fulfilled. Every now and then, Jordan misses her cooking and the comfort of her steady advice. Something about her calm voice just grounds him. But bro wouldn't be needing any support after this game the way he was dusting Carolina's defense.
Hey, old man, give me everything.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me.
Jordan had one more big play off the catch and run, play action, getting the ball, taking it up the field to seal the deal with a 21-10 lead in the third quarter. Not to say that Carolina didn't make it interesting in the end, as the final score was 21-18, and Stanford had somewhat recovered from the 0-2 start. Life in the dorms has its ups and downs. You'd think that by now, Jordan would be out living on his own with all that NIL money flying around, but he liked living with his friend. Mike, Jordan's roommate and linebacker friend from Texas, was still his best friend on campus, but things had been weird lately. Over the summer, Mike's parents went through a rough divorce, and he hadn't been the same since. He'd been withdrawing, missing hangouts, and keeping to himself more often than ever before. They used to joke around after practice, crank up the music in their dorm, and hit up the student center for late-night snacks. Now, there's this underlying tension Jordan can't figure out how to address. Every time he tries to check in, Mike just brushes him off with a, "Nah, I'm good, bro." But Jordan can tell that he's not. One night after practice, they're both lying in their beds, and Jordan hears Mike sigh deeply. "You ever feel like nothing you do is good enough?" Mike mutters. And Jordan was caught off guard. "I mean, yeah, man, all the time." Mike turns over into his bed. I just don't know, man. My dad, football, school, it feels like I'm juggling too much, and I'm dropping everything." For the first time in a while, Mike let him in. Jordan didn't have all the answers, but he knew that he could be there for his friend. "I get it, dude. Sometimes I feel the same way, but you're not dropping everything. You're still here. You're still fighting through it. It's not a solution, but it's progress, and for now, that's enough." Jordan and Stanford took a pounding from Pitt metaphorically that set them back again with another loss. Jordan wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't used to sharing his inner feelings with his friends like Mike. These things went unspoken in the Meadows household. So it was draining for Jordan to help his roommate out, and after the team fell flat on their face against Pitt, he needed some time to relax, but he got a text from his academic advisor letting him know that he had basically failed all his midterms with D's and F's. Jordan was stressing over this after his freshman year came so easy to him academically. Right when Jordan was about to sit down to get back on track with his schoolwork, he got a call from Zaccheus. Over in Atlanta, things were heating up for Zaccheus, Jordan's younger brother. Zaccheus, a star high school quarterback, is starting to feel the pressure that Jordan knows all too well. Every time they FaceTime, Zaccheus complains about how everyone expects him to be perfect like Jordan. The comparison eats at him, even though Jordan has tried to make it clear that he's always in his brother's corner. "Bro, I'm not you," Zaccheus says one night over the phone. His frustrations are clear. "Everyone keeps talking about how I gotta be the next Meadows on the field, but I don't even know if I want that." Jordan leans back in his desk chair, staring at his screen. "You don't have to be me, Z. Do what makes you happy. Forget what everyone else wants." It's easy advice to give, but harder to follow. Jordan knows how tough it is to ignore expectations, especially when they're tied to your family name. The pressure to live up to his dad's legacy, and now apparently the expectations his own success sets for Zaccheus, is something that never really goes away. Jordan tries to keep reminding Zaccheus that it's okay to carve his own path, but deep down, he wonders if he's even taking his own advice. The win against Miami carried mixed emotions. Jordan and Stanford knocked off a 3-3 top 10 team, but immediately after the game, he was hit with a message from his academic advisor warning him that he was close to academic suspension, which would sideline him from the team. Stanford was at least 3-3 at this point, and Jordan's stats were better on average compared to his freshman season. Seeing that progress did liven up Jordan's spirits a bit amidst all the things that were nagging at him. The team felt like it was moving in the right direction, righting the ship after an 0-2 start when they matched up against a formidable 5-2 Virginia squad. It was nice to come to Virginia and know that his dad, Zach, was watching the game in the stands, but it was a struggle fest for Jordan and the team. In the third quarter, Jordan was laid out by a Virginia backer, forcing him to fumble and injuring him after an unremarkable game. Somehow, Stanford held on to win the game and improved to a winning record for the first time in over a year. Jordan continued to develop as a player, and in Week 8, Stanford got a chance to rematch against SMU, who was ranked top 5 last year at the time that they played. Jordan started out the game hot with a few nice outside run concepts the coach schemed up for him, but it didn't end up translating into points, as on 3rd and 4, SMU sent a blitz at Ashton Daniels, and Jam tried his best to block 5 guys at once, but Daniels couldn't find an open receiver and got sacked. The game was getting ugly early as Jordan got stuffed on his first rush and later fumbled the ball after being hit in the backfield to give SMU the ball up 10 on the Stanford 20-yard line. Jordan did have another breakaway run in the second quarter, which was immediately forgotten about as Ashton Daniels threw a pick 6 the next play to go down 20-0 against SMU. Jordan fumbled the ball again with SMU recovering at the Stanford 40, and this game looked like it was over. While Jordan was recovering from the hit, Stanford somehow ripped off 21 straight points, and it was starting to be concerning the amount that Stanford's offense was scoring without Jordan on the field. Jordan had one more meaningful catch with a minute left and down 5 before being pulled off the field, and Ashton Daniels capped the drive with a game-clinching touchdown, an absolutely insane comeback for Stanford. The following game was at home, and Stanford had a crazy amount of momentum to the point that some reporters picked the Cardinals over number 7 ranked Florida State, but the Seminoles had other plans as they shut down the Stanford offense all game, and Jordan had only one nice run after the catch to speak about in the game. Florida State had an easy W, 23-7. With only 3 games left in the season, Stanford needed just one win to go to a bowl game. Being a sophomore is weird. Freshman year was hard. He expected that, but this year, Jordan thought he'd have it more together. He's struggling to balance school, practice, and his personal life, and the pressure was starting to get to him. His grades had slipped, not by much, but enough that he was getting emails from the academic advisor. His mom didn't know yet, and Jordan's trying to keep it that way. Then there's the whole student-athlete life. The schedule was brutal, early morning workouts, classes, practice, film sessions, and then somehow finding energy to study. There were days where Jordan just wanted to collapse into bed and never get up. It was already common knowledge that Jordan's grades had been slipping consistently since his freshman year because of the intensity of his daily schedule. In one of his few quiet moments, Jordan sat alone at the library flipping through his econ textbook, and his professor, Dr. Fennell, noticed that Jordan's distracted look, and he decided to take a seat next to him. He said, "You okay, Jordan? You've been off lately." Jordan chuckled awkwardly. "Just a lot going on, football, classes, everything." And then Dr. Fennell nodded. "You're not just an athlete, Jordan. You're a student. You've got a lot of potential in and out of the stadium. Don't forget about that." It's one of those comments that lingers even after the conversation ends. And Jordan's dad talks a lot about football, but Dr. Fennell is one of the few people who talks to him about what comes next, life beyond college ball. And Jordan isn't sure what that looks like yet, but he's starting to realize he can't let football be the only thing that defines him. As sophomore year pressed on, Jordan realized that football wasn't the only game that he was playing anymore. Life was throwing him curveballs in the form of strained friendships, family pressure, and the constant question of what's next. He's still figuring it out day by day. Even though there are moments when it feels like the weight of everything might be too much, Jordan knows that he is not in it alone. Between the phone calls with his mom, the late night talks with Mike, and the random moments of clarity from professors like Dr. Fennell, Jordan's learning that success isn't just about touchdowns or grades. It's about finding your path even when it feels like you're walking in somebody else's footsteps. And for now though, Jordan's just trying to enjoy the ride, even if he doesn't know exactly where it's headed. After all, figuring out who you are is what college is all about. And this rivalry game against Cal was the perfect opportunity to figure out what Jordan and Stanford were made of. Jordan and Stanford had clawed their way back to have the chance to tie the game with a 2-point conversion with a minute remaining, and Jordan knew he was getting the ball on a fake jet sweep. The O-line got bullied. Jordan escaped a D tackle, put a move on the backer in the B gap, cut back right, and just barely got tackled short of getting into the end zone. And this was their opportunity to make a bowl game. Stanford was on a 3-game slide, and their last game of the season was against number 3 Notre Dame, who clearly wanted revenge for what happened last season. As the season progressed, and the weight of expectations settled heavily on Jordan's shoulders, the thought of transferring started to creep into his mind. Stanford, with all its prestige and opportunities, wasn't feeling like the right fit anymore, and the football program was struggling, and the balance between academics and athletics was becoming overwhelming for Jordan. The dream he had once had of building his legacy at Stanford started to feel distant and almost completely unreachable. One late night, after another grueling practice, Jordan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone, and his dad's name was highlighted on the screen, his thumb hovering over the call button. He needed advice, but asking Zaccheus, his father, the legend, about the possibility of leaving Stanford, that was something that he couldn't take lightly. Zach had always pushed him to be resilient, to tough things out, even when Zach himself had transferred during college. But this felt different. It wasn't just about football anymore. It was about figuring out where he truly belonged. Notre Dame ended up scoring back-to-back touchdowns with under 2 minutes left to seal the game in a similar fashion to how Stanford had done it the previous year, and Stanford would miss a bowl game after being 5-3. After the game, Jordan got a text from his academic advisor telling him he received an F and 3 Ds for his final exams. After a deep breath, Jordan made the call to his dad, Zaccheus.
Jordan called his dad and finally brought it up. "Dad, I've been thinking, maybe Stanford's not the right place for me." There was a pause. Jordan could feel the weight of his father's silence, and in that moment, he wasn't sure how Zach would respond. Transferring wasn't giving up, but would his dad see it that way? Zach's answer was measured, almost cautious. "It's your decision, Jordan, but remember why you're there. Think about what you want long term." No judgment, no strong push either way, just a reminder that Jordan needed to figure out what was best for him. It wasn't a rejection of the idea, but it also wasn't an endorsement. His dad, as always, was leaving the final decision to him. In his first game at USC, and by USC I mean the South Carolina Gamecocks, they would play against Miami. Jordan still needed to earn the starting running back spot, which left him playing a lot of receiver, and he still needed to earn the trust of his quarterback, Lenora Sellers, who threw a pick to begin the second quarter. Sellers did make up for it on the next drive, absolutely threading the needle between the safety and the cornerback for a touchdown to take the lead in the third, but it wouldn't be enough as Miami would come back to take the win 31-24, and Jordan really didn't do anything. The first game being an L is obviously what Jordan was hoping to avoid moving to the SEC and playing for a talent-heavy roster like South Carolina, but this is where we are. Jordan and the Gamecocks would have a get-right game against the FCS East, where Jordan could showcase his skills more and prove that he deserved more touches and more trust from his quarterback. Jordan continued to put his skill set on tape, taking several design plays for extra yards, picking up first downs, and making catches consistently out of the backfield. The offense struggled to get into the end zone, but when Jordan's number was called, he made plays, and he showed that he deserved more touches if the offense wanted to function. Selfishly, Jordan was more interested at this point in going to the league than team success. He was so used to churning out 5-7 losing seasons that he approached the game more like a businessman in order to keep his own sanity. There was also a little bit of ego left to Jordan's game. He saw himself as LaShawn McCoy, but really played like a one-cut receiving back. He didn't typically have explosive jukes or breakaway speed. He was more Austin Eckler than Shady McCoy, and that could still get him drafted. The game was stuck at a disgusting score of 3-2 until midway through the third, and Jordan was getting some rest on the sidelines, and the offense went out and scored their only touchdown of the day versus a Division II school, which sounded the alarms a little bit amongst boosters and diehard fans. Jordan came in for the final possession and helped run the clock out, and South Carolina would come out with the win 13-5 over FCS East. And then after the game, Jordan also upgraded his elusiveness, continuing to get better. In week 3, South Carolina and Jordan would have their biggest test of the season, going against undefeated number 4 Texas. Despite getting stopped on 3rd and 2nd and forcing the 4th down and the punt to start the game, South Carolina did score the first touchdown to take a 7-0 lead, but Texas took 24 straight points on the board, and it was 24-7 before Texas took a commanding 31-12 lead in the fourth quarter with 4 minutes remaining. And Jordan got to show off a little bit of his ability to catch out of the backfield in this game, but Lenora Sellers was selling in this game. He had 150 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and Texas would roll away with the win 31-19 in division. And Jordan was off to a decent start, averaging 5.5 yards per carry, but still no touchdowns to speak of. South Carolina was just different. Everything felt a little bit more laid back, but at the same time, there was an intense passion for football that Jordan hadn't experienced on the West Coast. Jordan's first few days on campus were a whirlwind of new faces, new routines, and a whole lot of questions. Moving into his new apartment, he found himself missing Mike, his old roommate from Stanford. Mike had eventually opened up more about his family issues, and they'd grown closer again before Jordan left. Now as Jordan unpacked his bags alone, it hit him how much had changed. He traded the familiar West Coast campus for the heat of South Carolina, the academic pressure of Stanford, for the football-crazed world of the SEC. But new wasn't necessarily bad. His new teammates welcomed him with open arms. They knew who he was, a big-name transfer from Stanford, the son of Zaccheus. That came with some respect, but also some expectations. It was clear that they thought he'd be a game changer, someone who could come in and contribute right away. Jordan wasn't naive. He knew the SEC was no joke. He had to prove himself all over again, which was both exciting and terrifying. This Kentucky game was a perfect venue for that. South Carolina needed to regain a winning record, and while 2 early losses would likely end their chances of competing for an SEC title or playoff berth this season, a bowl game was still a prerequisite for transferring to South Carolina to begin with. And Jordan would make his statement in this game as he scored another touchdown for South Carolina that gave them a 3-possession lead going into the fourth quarter. South Carolina would narrowly pull out the victory 27-24.
During one of his first weekends off, Jordan flew back to California to visit his family. It was the first time he'd seen them since the transfer, and there was a sense of finality in the air, like he'd officially closed the Stanford chapter of his life. His dad had picked him up from the airport, and as they drove through the familiar streets of his hometown, Jordan felt a mix of nostalgia and relief. Zach was as calm and supportive as ever, though Jordan could tell his dad had his own thoughts about the transfer. They talked about football, about South Carolina, but Zach never pushed. He didn't have to. Jordan could feel the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was this the right move? Proud of you for making the call, though, Zach finally said as they pulled into the driveway. A lot of guys stay stuck, afraid to make a change. Jordan didn't say much in return. His dad had always been the strong, silent type, letting his actions speak louder than his words. But hearing those words meant something. It made Jordan feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't running away from anything. He was running towards something better for once. But that feeling would fade quickly as Arkansas intercepted the pass with a minute remaining and South Carolina would fall to 2-3. Football at South Carolina was everything that Jordan had expected and more. The intensity of the practices, the size of the players, and the speed of the game, it was on a whole different level from anything that he'd experienced in the past. The coaches didn't coddle anyone. It didn't matter if you were a transfer from Stanford or a highly touted recruit from the South. If you couldn't hang, you'd be left behind. Jordan was determined not to be left behind. Early mornings turned into late nights as he threw himself into practice, the playbook, and the weight room. His new coach, Coach Harris, was a tough but fair man who had a reputation for molding great running backs. He saw potential in Jordan, but didn't let him coast on his name or his past. If anything, Jordan felt like Coach Harris pushed him harder because of it. The SEC isn't the Pac-12, Coach Harris said one afternoon after practice. We don't care what your last name is. You got to earn every inch here. And Jordan respected that. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted the chance to prove he belonged on his own performance. In Week 6, he finally had that breakout performance with 15 carries for 120 rushing yards and a touchdown, but he immediately got a message from his academic advisor again telling him that he was close to failing his classes. His initial stats at this point in the season was still averaging 5 yards a carry and 65 rushing yards, and his receiving game was still really good too. He was averaging 21 receiving yards per game, and he also upgraded his ability to juke out defenders. Coming off an absolutely elite performance in Week 6, Week 7, Jordan was looking to do more of the same, but he barely got any opportunities against Mississippi State as South Carolina won 10-7, and McAllister got the bulk of the workload. But adjusting to life off the field was another challenge. Making new friends wasn't as easy as it had been at Stanford. Jordan missed the old banter that he'd have with Mike and the inside jokes that they'd have with other teammates. Here, everything felt a little bit more distant. He was still the new guy, and while the players were friendly, they weren't quick to let him in. One of the few people that he clicked with right away was his new roommate, Josh, a wide receiver from Georgia. Josh was easygoing, the type of guy who could find the humor in anything, and they bonded over late-night talks about life, football, and their shared love of old-school hip-hop. But even with Josh around, Jordan still felt a little out of place. South Carolina was different, and so were the people. He also found himself getting frustrated with how quickly people here made assumptions. Some of the players seemed to think Jordan had it easy because of his dad's name or his time at Stanford, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know how hard it had been to leave, to start over. They still didn't know that the pressure that came with being Zaccheus' son, especially when you were still trying to figure out who you were beyond that. During Jordan's junior year at South Carolina, his younger brother, Zaccheus, was dealing with his freshman year at Army. As a quarterback, Zaccheus had taken an immense physical beating, enduring hundreds of hits that left him physically and mentally drained. Despite his toughness and desire to uphold the family's military legacy, the relentless toll of playing quarterback at Army became too much. In their phone calls, Zaccheus confided in Jordan about the pain and exhaustion, admitting that he couldn't continue at that pace. As Jordan adjusted to life in the SEC, Zaccheus' journey served as a reminder of the importance of carving out your own path. Both brothers had taken risks by transferring or thinking of transferring, moving beyond the expectations placed on them to pursue what was best for their futures. Though on separate coasts, they remained connected, sharing in the challenges and growth that came with making tough but necessary decisions. After coming off a tight loss versus a ranked Florida team in the previous week, South Carolina had another challenging game against a ranked Utah team when they were down 17-7 in the third quarter. After Jordan's breakout performance versus Auburn, he had 2 straight duds against Mississippi State and Florida. In the Utah game, Jordan was having another classic performance where he got more yards than expected on designed runs, he made plays in the passing game, but he kept getting subbed off the field in the red zone, or Sellers would throw a bad pick or someone would fumble. It was the little things that kept biting South Carolina. For all the talent they had, their play was incredibly inconsistent, which drove Coach Harris crazy. It was still a tight game in the third quarter, but Jordan saw little action after the end of the third as they passed the ball a lot, and they ended up losing 24-21. Jordan had 19 carries for 130 yards. Now here's where the schedule got crazy. Jordan and the Gamecocks needed 2 wins in their last 3 games to secure a bowl game. First, they would play against number 14 Georgia. The following week would be number 6 Tennessee, and the final week was against number 5 Clemson. This is what Jordan signed up for, and Jordan was going to get the full SEC experience these final couple of weeks. The game plan for South Carolina was more of the same, and Jordan was getting tired of Coach Harris fast. He was sick of getting the team to the red zone just to be sent to the sideline for the offense to sputter with him out. Coach Harris promised a lot with Jordan coming to Carolina, and was looking more and more like the wrong decision. Not to say that staying at Stanford or Stanford was doing any better. Jordan liked living alone a little bit away from his family, but Carolina did not have the same appeal as Cali. Jordan had high expectations for Lenora Sellers, and he did not live up to the hype, consistently throwing bad balls that turned the tide of games, and if it wasn't a failed third down conversion killing a drive, it was another Sellers pick. The defense did their best to guard Georgia, but ultimately, South Carolina couldn't do enough on offense and only put up 10 points on the board, as Georgia would win the game at 24-10, meaning that South Carolina would need to win their next 2 games. Jordan prepared for this to be his last game at South Carolina. If they lost, they would officially be knocked out of even making a bowl game, something that Jordan just could not abide. So Jordan prepared himself like he did every other week to go into Tennessee and do everything in his power to positively affect the game. He couldn't worry about Coach Harris pulling him near the red zone, but if he got a touch, he knew he needed to be impactful against this Tennessee squad. Jordan got off to a hot start, averaging 5 yards per carry, and they had a couple of big runs early in the second quarter drive that led them to another touchdown, although Jordan did get pulled for red zone shots on this drive. In the third, Coach Harris was literally pulling everything out of the bag of tricks. You could sense that he didn't trust Sellers to take shots on the field, so he got creative with wide receiver sweeps and then some sweep reverses. Carolina was down 10 near the end of the third, but Coach Harris kept calling Jordan's number for some bailouts. Jordan had one big run to put the Gamecocks in good field position to start the fourth quarter, and then Jordan did it again with another nice run to get down to the 15, at which point he got benched again and the offense settled for a field goal once again. With a minute remaining in the game, almost all hope was lost, down by 7, but a USC receiver beat their man on the sideline, and Sellers finally made the correct read with an accurate ball that led the receiver enough for him to take it for the touchdown. The game went to overtime, and stunningly, Jordan didn't get to touch the ball even once. Tennessee celebrated, South Carolina was done for the postseason, and Jordan was ready to fly back to California. Jordan made what Antonio Pierce would call a business decision, flying back to California, which rubbed a lot of his teammates the wrong way before their game against Clemson. Despite a vaunted passing offense, Lenora Sellers finished the season with 2,000 passing yards, and Jordan Akira-Meadows finished with 800 rushing yards, along with 4 rushing touchdowns, and it was made clear to the whole team that Jordan would be transferring to a different school, and we'll look at that for his senior season. But Jordan did make All-SEC second team as a running back. Jordan Akira-Meadows stood in the shadow of Bryant-Denny Stadium, feeling both the weight and the opportunity of following in his father's footsteps. Transferring to Alabama for his senior year wasn't just about football, it was about honoring the family legacy while forging his own path. This was the final stop on a journey that had taken him from California to South Carolina and now to the heart of college football's fiercest football program, the SEC powerhouse his father once called home. Alabama's prestige had faded somewhat since Nick Saban's departure. To begin the year, Austin Mack quarterbacked an unranked Alabama team against the underdog West Virginia Mountaineers, who had a preseason top 10 ranked defense. Aside from the family legacy and rich football tradition, Jordan was set to be the starting back from the get-go in week 1. Even then, Jordan was not given many opportunities in his first game with Bama and was missed in the end zone before the half to make the deficit a 1-score game. In the second half, it got even uglier as Austin Mack threw a pick down the middle on a post route. The offenses for both teams were struggling as Bama just had 44 rushing yards and averaged just under 3 yards per play overall. To begin the fourth quarter, there was a glimmer of hope as Austin Mack found his receiver, who took it all the way from the 30-yard line after the catch for the touchdown. But West Virginia played really outstanding defense throughout the game and held Alabama to just 17 points, with 14 coming in the fourth quarter. With Jordan transferring twice over the past 2 years, it felt like a repeat of last season, where South Carolina played their first game with minimal involvement from Jordan while he waited to really have his debut in the second game of the season against a Division II school. The South Carolina game versus FCS East was troubling as the Gamecocks only scored 1 touchdown last year, and Jordan hoped and expected a better performance from his new team. If you're looking for drama, this game in the schedule is not where you're going to find it, as Jordan and Bama did roll through this game behind one of Jordan's best games ever. Not only did he make plays catching the ball out of the backfield, but he really showcased some shiftiness this season that was non-existent in his first 2 years at Stanford. One of the best things about following these young college players throughout their careers is seeing that they generally do not stay stagnant, meaning that they develop their skills and they do get better each year. In Jordan's case, starting as a top-tier recruit, he had generally underwhelmed compared to expectations so far. Some of you may be thinking, didn't he just win all SEC second-team honors at South Carolina last year? And he obviously did, but that doesn't quite cut it as one of the best recruits in the country. The expectation is championships, bowl games, and big awards, not just all SEC mentions. We tell unique stories here, and not every 5-star wins the Heisman and goes on to win 10 Super Bowls. Sometimes prospects are disappointments. Jordan hadn't been that so far, but he certainly wasn't must-watch TV either for most college football fans. Jordan and the Tide would play their next game against number 18 Ohio State. In week 3, Jordan had missed the game due to a minor calf injury against UAB, and Alabama was able to take care of business. Jordan had his workload cut down in this game a bit while still nursing the calf injury, and Alabama found themselves down 21-3 at half against Ohio State behind a sputtering passing game performance from Austin Mack. It seemed like the game was over midway through the third as Mack threw another pick down the middle, but somehow Bama ended up clawing their way back to being down by just a score. Jordan caught a ball out of the backfield and got the first in the Ohio State red zone, but the hit that he ended up taking knocked him out for the rest of the game. He watched from the sidelines as Alabama scored the touchdown, but got locked up on the 2-point conversion that would have tied the game. Being at Alabama brought Jordan closer to his family's legacy in a way that he hadn't anticipated. Everywhere he went, reminders of his father, Zaccheus, loomed large. Former players, coaches, and even fans who had been around long enough would mention Zach's name whenever they saw Jordan. They'd recount stories of his dad's dominant runs, the way he carried the team on his back during big moments, and how he'd gone on to a successful NFL career. It was flattering, sure, but also suffocating at times. Jordan knew that no matter what he did, people would always compare him to Zach. Jordan had a vintage Herculean comeback against A&M in a game that seemed like it was over before half. Jordan was once again sidelined with an injury while Bama and A&M went to OT, where A&M eventually failed a 2-point conversion, leaving Bama with an upset win at home. Austin Mack finished the game with 5 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. Jordan's relationship with his father had always been one of mutual respect, but being at his dad's alma mater added a new layer of complexity. Zach had never pressured him to follow in his footsteps, which Jordan appreciated, but now that he was here, he couldn't help but feel like his father watched him more closely. Their conversations took on a different tone, less about advice and more about shared experiences. Zach would tell him stories about his time at Alabama, about the coaches who had shaped him, the games that defined his career, and the lessons that went beyond football. But there were also moments of tension, moments where Jordan felt like he was living in the shadow of his father's legacy rather than standing in his own spotlight. One of the unexpected perks of being in Alabama was reconnecting with his uncle Marcus. Marcus had played linebacker at Alabama back in the day, and while he didn't have the same NFL career as Zach, he was a beloved figure in the Tuscaloosa community. Marcus had stayed close to the program, mentoring young players and offering advice to those struggling with the pressures of SEC football. Jordan started spending time at Marcus's house on the weekends, soaking in his uncle's stories and advice. Marcus' house was a modest brick home not far from campus, and sitting on the porch with his uncle as the sun set became one of Jordan's favorite routines. Marcus didn't sugarcoat things. He talked about the toll football took on his body, about the transition to life after the game, and how important it was to stay grounded. "Football doesn't last forever, Jordan," Marcus told him one evening, handing him a cold drink as they sat on the porch. "You're lucky you're good at it, but don't forget that there's a lot more to life than this game." That kind of talk was something that Jordan didn't hear often, especially not in the high-stakes world of Alabama football, but it stuck with him. Marcus had lived the life, seen the ups and downs, and managed to find peace on the other side of not playing the sport professionally. Jordan wasn't sure what the pro football world held for him. He had considered himself a first-round pick since his first game at Stanford, but scouts were not seeing it that way. Scouts saw an average athlete who couldn't cut it as a pure receiver due to the lack of separation against anyone beside linebackers. Jordan thought of himself as a Swiss Army knife like his dad, but he was more like a Swiss Army potato. One thing that Jordan did take pride in, though, throughout his entire college career was mentoring younger players, a trait that he inherited from his father. As a senior at Alabama, the role became even more significant. Freshmen looked up to him, not just because of his last name, but because of his journey. He had been through it all, changing schools, battling injuries, and balancing the pressures of expectations. And that experience made him someone his teammates could trust. Jordan made it a point to be available to anyone who needed advice, whether it was about football or life. He remembered how hard it had been to adjust as a freshman, so he'd often find himself in late-night conversations with younger players, offering guidance on everything from handling academics to dealing with the pressure of performing in front of thousands of fans. In particular, Jordan took one of the younger running backs under his wing, a freshman named Tyree. Tyree had all the talent in the world, but struggled with the mental side of the game. He'd get frustrated after mistakes, let missed assignments snowball into bad practices, and sometimes sometimes questioned if he even belonged at a place like Alabama. Jordan saw a lot of his younger self in Tyree, the doubt, the uncertainty, and made it his mission to help push him through it. Man, this place can feel like a pressure cooker sometimes, Jordan said one evening after practice as they sat on the bleachers, but you gotta find a way to stay calm, to tune that all out. You're here for a reason. You were one of the best backs in college football. Don't let one bad rep mess with your head. Jordan felt it was important to leave a lasting impact on the people who would carry the torch after him. Jordan realized that part of his legacy wouldn't just be what he did on the field, but how he helped others navigate their own challenges. This step up in leadership came at the perfect time for a struggling football program at Alabama that had lost its way. The team had fallen to 4-5 after getting ran out of the building in Kentucky, and their next game was against Florida, and Jordan could feel the impending end of his college career getting closer and closer. As the season progressed, Jordan found himself thinking a lot about the concept of legacy. Alabama was built on them, and everywhere he went, he was reminded of the greats who had come before him, including his father. But Jordan realized that the legacy he was building wasn't about championships or records, though that would be nice. It was about resilience, about the journey that had taken him from Stanford to South Carolina and now to Bama. Jordan thought about how his own decision to transfer had shaped him. It hadn't been easy to leave Stanford or South Carolina for that matter. Each move had been met with uncertainty, and at each time he'd questioned whether he was doing the right thing. But looking back, Jordan could see how each step led him to this moment, to Alabama, to a place where he could take everything he learned and leave it all on the field. As the season neared its end, Jordan started to reflect on what came next. The NFL was the obvious goal, but he wasn't thinking about just football. Whether it was business, coaching, or something entirely different, Jordan felt ready to take on whatever challenges awaited him after graduation. His economics professors had inspired him in ways that he hadn't expected, and he developed a genuine interest in the intersections between sports and business. He realized that just like with football, his career after Alabama would require hard work, dedication, and the same grit that had gotten him through the ups and downs in college. But no matter what path he chose, Jordan knew one thing for sure. He was more than his father's legacy. He was Jordan Akira-Meadows, not Zaccheus Randall or Zach Meadows. Alabama had already been eliminated from making a bowl, something that everyone who's followed Jordan's career is too familiar with. The lack of team success throughout Jordan's career was actually mind-boggling. No matter what program Jordan went to, the quarterback struggled and the defense gave up big points. Now, Jordan didn't win the Heisman, he didn't win the best running back award, but he did make All-SEC second team once again with 865 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, some of you might be asking the question, what's going to be next for Jordan Akira-Meadows? Is he going to be heading to the NFL? Is he going to pursue coaching? Wait for the first episode of the Zaccheus Randall series to come out, which will explain more about Jordan's future.
After that season, Jordan was preparing for the NFL draft when he received a call from his agent, John Norris. All right, Jordan, before the combine, the league just needs you to go through a comprehensive physical exam in the next week. After that, let's do some prep work for the combine coming up in a month. Jordan was trying to check off all the boxes. He was hoping that his grind would pay off in the combine because right now he was projected to be a 6th-round running back. In the 6th, nothing is guaranteed about your future in the league, especially at running back. And Jordan knew his time was limited at the position. Flash forward a month, and Jordan was beginning his combine drills. Jordan's work during the offseason was paying off, and he was beating benchmarks that were set for him. Everything was gravy until Jordan received another call from his agent from the stands. Jordan, I just got word from the league office that you failed your physical and they're going to need to pull you from the combine. Jordan was stunned. What do you mean? I've passed every physical I've taken in the past. John replied, NFL exams are more comprehensive than standard high school and college physicals. They believe that you have an enlarged heart and it's unlikely you'll be cleared to finish the combine until more tests can be run. That basically ended it for Jordan. A fantastic day at the combine turned into a nightmare as word of Jordan's condition spread around league circles at the combine. Jordan was now viewed as a risky 6th-round running back with a heart condition, and Jordan went undrafted and faced some dark moments in the following months after the combine. But ultimately, he was relieved he took some econ and business courses seriously. Luckily, Jordan had the support of his mother and father along with Zaccheus and Marcus. Jordan loved the game and wanted to stay around it, so he ended up deciding to become a sports agent himself.